I predicted at the start of this year that 2023 would be the year that we finally started talking about childcare as a political issue. And it seems that we have. Obviously, it's not a new issue. Parents, or let's face it, mothers have been talking about the challenges of this for years and years. But it does seem like politicians are finally starting to listen, or at least they're starting to say that they're starting to listen. Zoe, why has it become an issue now? What is the context for this sudden realisation that having children in this country is really hard?
One of the major issues is the cost of living, which has really put into perspective how unaffordable childcare is. So when costs are spread really thin, childcare, which was already extremely expensive compared to other countries, has just become this huge kind of political issue because you can't really cut back on childcare. You know, you have to have someone look after your children. So it's one of those necessities that's become really expensive. But I think also lockdown really brought into perspective issues around childcare when people were forced to stay at home with their children weren't allowed to go into school. It became really clear how difficult it is to look after your children without proper support if you're working. Those two things together have made this sort of increasingly important in the political sphere. Just today, actually, as this podcast will be released, the Centre for Progressive Policy have released some really interesting research about the economic impact of childcare. So they found that a lack of affordable and accessible childcare is costing the economy billions. So they think the estimated lost economic output is upwards of 27 billion. So that's about 1% of GDP,
wow,
which is a huge amount lost to unaffordable childcare. They've also found that about 54% of mums, so they particularly surveyed mums, have struggled to find suitable childcare since becoming a parent. And based on their results, they've predicted that about 540,000 mums have been prevented from entering paid work due to a lack of childcare, and about 470,000 have quit their jobs. So it's a really huge issue, and it's sort of disproportionately impacting women as well. And as we're ramping up towards election time, we're going to see how this issue becomes increasingly political, increasingly important.
Alona, you interviewed Stella Creasy, the Labour MP who's been a real campaigner on the part of working parents with things like taking her baby into the House of Commons and campaigning for better provision in all kinds of ways. What did you get from her when you spoke to her?
So she talked about, as Zoe outlined, the kind of the political moment and this momentum that's building from the cost of living crisis, but also from the pandemic. And she talked about the role of very prominent activist groups like Pregnant Then Screwed, who have really managed to raise this issue to the fore, And we're going to hear a clip from her.
One of the things that I think is so important about the debate that's happening now is finally people are seeing this not as an equalities issue, but an economics issue. But it has been the case for generations that our economy has been stifled by losing talent from the workplace because we haven't made childcare work. We are one of the least productive nations in the G7. Brexit has held us below the line, but we were already sinking. And one of the reasons we were sinking is because we don't use our social capital, our people, in the best way. And when you dig deeper into the figures, that's often women, and it's women of childbearing age. And one of the things I think is so troubling post-pandemic, every other country has recovered except for the country that's had Brexit. But also if you look at the figures about the numbers of women who are not working right now but want to, it's going up. The ones who are saying the reason they can't is caring responsibilities. So we were already falling behind our competitors in how we dealt with this issue and the impact it was having on productivity. And it's getting worse, not better, which is why this debate needs to happen, but also action needs to happen now. Do I think that would be happening without the role that groups like Pregnant and Screwed and Mother Pucker and Mumsnet have all played? Look, I think what happened in the pandemic is that mums were at home and watching government say, oh yes, we really ought to invest in potholes, but you parents, let's give you a slap on the back and that's enough for you. And it was like the kind of bubble burst. People said, if we don't organise, nothing will change. So absolutely, frankly, as somebody who's, say, been campaigning on it for many years within the political process, it's been seen as a niche issue for women. It's not now. And that, I think, is down to the change in the campaigning organisations.
I think something else that's really key here, and Zoe mentioned that obviously we have an election on the horizon at some point. Conservatives are losing women voters. Labour know that they have women voters to gain, and this is such a big election winner potentially for them. So it's kind of it's necessary and also unavoidable for anybody who maybe wants to win the next election.
So before we get into the detail of policy, I wondered, Alona, as our as our parent on the panel. For non-parents out there, or for people whose children have grown up and having small children is sort of a distant dream, can you give us a sense of what the landscape is like? You hear lots of things like terms like tax-free childcare or 30 free hours of childcare. Like, how much is a nursery place, and what is it like as a parent of a preschool age child trying to balance it all? I have to say, you are looking incredibly energetic for the mother of two small children.
Well, I'm very lucky in that I have a partner who does a lot of childcare, so I think I'm not a representative example, but I think it's really useful here to quote a survey that Pregnant Then Screwed did last year, which found, I think they surveyed more than 20,000 parents, and they found that 2/3 of families spend as much or more than their mortgage or rent on childcare. So it is extortionately expensive, and we all know we're among the most expensive in the OECD. We're talking about parents are spending £900 a month or something on sending their kids, not even full time necessarily, to a nursery. The way that the system works, and this is you're testing me on my memories of having sent my first daughter to nursery. This was I need to remember a few years ago. You get a number of free hours, so you get 30 free hours of childcare if both parents are working. You get only 15 if only one of them is working. So it's very much tied to parents working, and also you have to be able to pay. You have a sort of childcare account. You have to put money into it as well. You get taxed back.
Oh, it's a very glitchy government.
It's a complicated system, and it's not the way that the 30 hours work. And other parents, might correct me on this. You can't necessarily choose exactly when you want the times and the days. It's not a perfect system. And of course, the other issue with the system, beyond the fact that it's not simple to kind of claim this stuff, and it's complicated for people on universal credit as well. The sector itself is in crisis, as we know. So the last year, I think a record number of nurseries have closed in England, something like 4,000 over the past year. So when you're looking to put your child in childcare, there are a few options, and they are incredibly expensive. And as your children get older, and when they're actually in school, the problem is, of course, that school is only between 9 and 3 in the afternoon. So you need, one of the things that Labour has pledged is free breakfast clubs for everybody, because parents find it so difficult.
Yeah, wraparound care.
Exactly, the wraparound care. It's a very broken system, and fixing it around the edges, what the Labour Party seems to have understood, won't make things work.
Yeah, I was really shocked to discover that the 30 free hours, which I think you only get when your child is 3, so before the age of 3, you're on your own. But it's only during school term time. So if you even it out over the course of the year...
And it depends on the nursery. So in some nurseries, it's not only during term time. It depends when the nursery is open. It's not as simple as, like, I know that I get this many days a week,
But it works out as far fewer than 30 hours.
Yeah, it does work out as fewer. And the other issue you raise, which is really important, is if you have a baby, you can take up to a year off on maternity leave. Statutory maternity pay here is incredibly low. It's 90% of your pay for 6 weeks, which is nothing. And most, if you're lucky, your employer will pay you more. Between the age of, from 1 to 3, most people don't have any subsidies for childcare. So there's a kind of there's a 1 year gap there in the middle where you're basically, if you can't afford to send them in, you can't afford to go to work. It's a big problem.
The UK, as we've said, has the second highest childcare cost in the OECD, but this is a challenge that other countries are facing to varying degrees. Zoe, you've been looking at Australia as a kind of example, a very similar country in a lot of ways, sort of demographic terms to the UK. And suddenly this issue that was kind of seen as the niche women's issue became a kind of top priority in the election, didn't it?
Yeah, so I think for Labour, for UK Labour, they really see what Australia did as kind of how they won the election. So they wanted a really future-facing programme of childcare and a universal 90% subsidy for childcare. Yeah, so it's a really kind of impressive, generous offering. And from UK Labour's perspective, that really won the election. And I think they're wanting to adopt a really similar model and put childcare at the forefront of their sort of economic growth plan. So I know that Bridget Phillipson, who's the Shadow Education Secretary, has been spending some time in Australia talking to the leader, and she's also been going to Estonia as well, where they've got a really kind of comprehensive childcare system, and they're trying to bring those lessons home in their childcare policy. So what have Labour kind of pledged so far? So So far it's been a bit sort of ambiguous, and there's been lots of kind of, we're going to put childcare at the forefront of our offering and it's going to be amazing, it's going to be really big. So far, as Alona said, they've got universal free breakfast clubs for every primary school child, and they've also pledged to amend the Childcare Act, which would essentially allow councils to open maintained nursery provision where they have capacity. I've been speaking to some advisors in the Labour Party, and they have basically said there's lots more coming, and Labour really want this to be kind of the key mission of the next government. So I think we can expect the next few months, as we ramp up to kind of election campaigning time, much more announced, a big offering.
I'm getting the impression from UK Labour and Keir Starmer that it's all tied up in Labour's economic growth vision. Childcare is often seen as a social policy because it's to do with women, but we've heard lots about how many people are out of the labour market. There are 9 million people in the UK out of the labour market for various reasons, and one of the top reasons is caring for children. And the fact, as we've discussed, lots of parents, lots of mothers simply cannot afford to go back to work. Do you think they can do that? Do you think they can tie these two things together and make the sort of economic case for this to be an investment in the same way as we would see investing in rail or housing or other infrastructure?
Well, Stella Creasy managed to put an amendment through to the Levelling Up Bill in December, which basically means that childcare can be treated as infrastructure by local authorities.
Which, let's be clear, it is.
It is.
If
absolutely.
it's enabling people to go to work, that is a form of infrastructure.
And that is what she says, and the idea of the amendment is that you'll be able to kind of fund childcare settings and people working in them as infrastructure, which is a really a big kind of paradigm shift. And it definitely relates to this idea of kind of, how do you, if you've got a big productivity gap and a lagging economic growth, you need more people getting into the workforce. It makes sense. But I think there's another element to it. And I don't think, by the way, that it's a difficult case to make anymore. It kind of seems pretty accepted. Nobody thinks it's radical and crazy for the Labour Party to be saying, this will help economic growth in any way. But something else that kind of seems to be a bit more missing from the conversation is the quality of the childcare, the fact that you can, if you give really good quality childcare to people, and not just because they want to go to work, but because you want children to have a really good start in life, you can really help in terms of inequality. Some children, some families, the kind of the cliche of choosing between heating and eating. For those families, if they had a really good, high quality, free childcare setting to send their child to, their child might be better fed, might be warmer, and might have a better start in life than they would in a system where their parents don't have access to that. So I think there's a big point about economic growth, but there's another one about kind of equality and well-being and life outcomes and education that's kind of slightly been missing. It'd be great to see how Labour kind of brings that in as we get closer to the election, because obviously Bridget Phillipson's coming at this from an education portfolio, and it's not just about the economic growth, really, even though obviously that's such a powerful way of making the case for Labour.
It's interesting talking about treating childcare as infrastructure, because one of the CPP's recommendations in their recent report was that childcare should be treated as economic critical infrastructure in the same way that rail or roads are, because their argument is it allows people to go to work, just as the rail allows people to go to work. It allows people to access better skills and earnings, and it contributes to our economic productivity. So they're calling on the government to treat it as critical economic infrastructure, so it would be part of the same kind of funding plans as kind of rail or roads. On the quality point as well, Labour has also kind of promised to deliver a renewed focus on the early years. So early years education is a real big part of their kind of education policy, and they're putting a lot of kind of emphasis on the importance of early years care, education, and making sure children have the best start in life. And some of that, of course, is on the back of the pandemic, where development was slowed and children were out of school, but it's also another part of this kind of big childcare offering. It's giving kids the best start in life. So I think we will see, going forward, looking at Labour's policy, an intersection between early years and childcare. So it will be not just this economic offering, but also a kind of education, health, social care offering as well.
I guess the one thing that it is amazing to see how this has become a political priority. It's something that we are seeing in real time happening over the past year. And the big shift I think that will come is from it not being seen as an issue for women to fix, but an issue for everybody to fix. And that's the big shift that still needs to happen. And it's really interesting that the Labour Party, the people who seem to be most active in pushing this policy are women. That Liz Truss was the woman who pushed it. Why is it that women are the ones who still prioritise this thing? We need to make sure that men think that it's their responsibility too.
If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can see more videos from the New Statesman on your screen now.